Chapter 8. A Nest Robber. At once a search started for the missing Holly. The girls ran along the beach near the water. None of them dared say out loud the dreadful thought that had come to them. Holly might have been caught by a wave and swept into the water. Scowbanger and the boys hurried to the top of the dune, because the old man was sure he'd seen Holly up there. She was nowhere in sight and did not answer their shouts. "What'll we do?" Ricky asked, struggling to keep back the tears. He was very close to Holly, and if anything had happened to her... "Maybe she went home," Scowbanger suggested, seeing the worried looks of both boys. But Holly had not gone home. At this moment, she was lost and trapped deep in the pine woods back of the dune. After she had seen Pete give up the chase, Holly had spied an extra-large pine cone and decided to look for more. "They'll be nice to hang on our Christmas tree next winter," she told herself. Walking along slowly, hunting for perfect cones, the girl smiled suddenly. The trees reminded her of little gnarled gnomes which she had read about in fairy tales. The trunks and branches were twisted, she supposed, from the high winds and severe storms. As she went deeper into the woods, Holly was delighted with the lovely scent and the thick carpet of pine needles. How wonderful it was to walk on them. She kept pulling cones from the trees and picking them up from the ground. Soon both her hands were so full she had a hard time holding all the cones. "If I only had a bag to put these in," she thought. Suddenly she saw a withered vine trailing along the ground. This gave her an idea. Stripping the vine of its brown leaves, Holly tied one cone after another to it. Soon she had a whole string of them. "I guess I have plenty," she decided, and turned around to retrace her steps to the beach. Holly thought it would be no trouble at all to find her way back, since she could hear the faint murmur of the ocean in the distance. But after a while she stopped. Now the sound seemed to come from all directions at once. Which way was the ocean? Holly walked first in one direction, then in another. But she did not come to the edge of the woods. "I know," Holly told herself. "The sun will show me which way to go." When she looked up, though, the sun was directly overhead and gave her no help in finding the right direction. Holly was determined to remain calm, but could not keep from worrying a little. She began to walk faster through the pine woods, dragging the cones behind her. Suddenly she stubbed her toe. "Ouch!" she cried, and looked down. Her foot was stuck beneath a twisted root, which had been hidden by the soft pine needles. Holly tried to free herself, but the more she pulled and tugged, the tighter her foot became wedged in the odd root formation. "I'm trapped," she thought. "How will I ever get out of here?" Now Holly was frightened. She dropped her string of pine cones and cupped her hands to her mouth. "Pete! Pam! Scowbanger!" she shouted. When no reply came, she waited a few seconds and then cried out again. "Oh, if they could only hear me!" she wailed, when still there was no answer. A tear ran down Holly's nose, and her chin began to quiver. She tugged again to get her foot out, but it hurt her dreadfully to pull it. She must get help. "Pete! Pam!" she called out with all her might. Was that only a faint echo she heard, or was it somebody answering her call? Holly shouted again. It hadn't been an echo. Somebody was calling her name, Pam's voice. In a few moments, Pete, Pam, and Ricky burst into sight. Holly was so relieved to see them, she started laughing and crying at the same time. "Oh, Holly, what happened to you?" Pam exclaimed, running up to her. Her sister showed how her foot had become caught in the scraggly roots. Pete unfastened her sandal, then gently eased Holly's foot out as Ricky pulled the roots apart. Then the sandal was put back on. We thought maybe you drowned," Pam said, a bit hysterically. "I'm terribly sorry I worried you all," Holly apologized, picking up the pine cones and hurrying after the others to the beach. How relieved Sue, Rachel, and Scowbanger were to see Holly. "Must be mighty hard keeping track of a big family like yours," the beachcomber grinned. Pam thought the children should return home, and Scowbanger said that he would walk along with them part of the way. Presently they came to a place where the shoreline curved. As they rounded a little point, the group saw a boy halfway up a dune. He was bending over something set in the sand among a clump of bayberry bushes. "Hey there," Scowbanger called. "What are you doing?" When the boy looked around, Rachel exclaimed, "That's Homer Roughly." "The scamp!" Scowbanger cried angrily. "He's stealing eggs from a tern's nest." When Homer heard the beachcomber's remark, he scooped out several of the bird's eggs into his cap and started up at a quick pace over the dunes. "Come back here," Scowbanger demanded in a stern voice. "It's against the law to steal tern's eggs." But Homer paid no attention. He broke into a fast run and scooted out of sight before anybody had a chance to chase him. "What a bothersome rascal he is," Scowbanger muttered. "Takes after his father, all right. Mr. Roughly's bragging that he'll find the pirate treasure." Soon they reached Uncle Russ's house. So Pam invited Scowbanger to come in. When she introduced him, Uncle Russ said, "Scowbanger and I are old acquaintances. By the way," he asked the beachcomber, "do you still have that old diving outfit?" Scowbanger had raked in a diving suit from the waves years before and never found the owner. The suit was still in good condition. "Would you do me a big favor? Put on the suit and go down off our dock," Uncle Russ asked him. "I'd like to make some sketches for my comic strip." Scowbanger laughed and said he guessed he'd be funny all right. He would do it. "When do you want me?" the beachcomber asked. "Could you be here at 3 this afternoon?" "That I can," he replied, and departed for his shack. At 3 o'clock sharp, Scowbanger drove up in Jenny Jump. He stopped the beach buggy alongside the lone pier, where Uncle Russ had asked him to come. The beachcomber carried the diving suit out to where the Hollisters were standing at the end. "All set?" the cartoonist asked him. "I am," the old man replied. As he tried to wiggle into the diving suit, Pete sprang forward to help him. Before Scowbanger put on the helmet, he pointed to the hose and the machine at the end of it. "Somebody will have to keep track of this air pump," he said. "Be very careful that I get enough air while I'm walking on the bottom of the ocean." "Don't worry," Uncle Russ assured him. "You just show us how to operate the pump." After hearing the instructions, Mr. Hollister felt certain he could manipulate it. "I'd better take my position in the boat," Uncle Russ said. "Come on, Pete." The cartoonist had rented a glass-bottom rowboat, which was tied to a post under the pier. Pete was to keep it steady with the oars, while his uncle sketched. The two climbed down a ladder and sat down in the boat. "All ready," Uncle Russ called. Scowbanger now clamped on a funny round helmet. Then, waving to his audience, he climbed slowly down the ladder. He kept watching Uncle Russ for instructions. The artist was working fast. Every once in a while he would hold up his hand for the diver to pause, or to hold out an arm or a leg. Scowbanger caught on quickly to the idea of making the pictures funny. He bent over for a couple of minutes, then he stood with just one hand and one foot on the ladder, pretending to be falling. "This is like a circus," Ricky cried gleefully. Finally, Scowbanger reached the water. Everyone watched, fascinated, as first his feet disappeared, then his legs. Soon only the big round helmet could be seen. The next second, Scowbanger was out of sight. "Oh, is he all right?" Sue asked, clutching her mother's hand. "Yes, dear," Mrs. Hollister replied, and looked down to where air bubbles from the diving suit's exhaust were appearing on the surface of the water. Uncle Russ was sketching furiously. He seemed to be able to look through the floor of the glass-bottomed boat and draw on the pad before him all at the same time. Suddenly the artist began to chuckle. Scowbanger just hugged a big fish, and it slapped him on the helmet with its tail, he called up. The Hollisters laughed. But suddenly they stopped as they heard running footsteps. Homer Roughly was coming along the dock toward them. "Hey, is your diver looking for the pirate treasure?" he asked. "No, he's not," Ricky replied. "Then what is he looking for?" Homer wanted to know. Ricky explained that his Uncle Russ was only making sketches of the diver. Homer seemed satisfied, at least for a few seconds. Then he walked over to the air pump. "Say, this isn't the way you work a pump," he said, touching the apparatus. "My father showed me how." Mr. Hollister called a warning to the boy to take his hands off, but it was too late. Homer had turned a valve on the pump. A second later, there was a violent tug on the line extending down to Scowbanger. "Something's gone wrong," Ricky cried.